In a dark apartment in Japan, a boy is beaten by his own father, who finds any excuse to hit the kid. This time he was furious because his son was taking too long to eat, and in his mind that was reason enough to hit him. Not fully understanding why he was being beaten, the child kept repeating an apology. Years later, these abuses still haunted Takamamori. On a school trip, he overhears Sagu Ayaka, the Class 2C representative, demanding the return of a book that Omiyata had taken just to annoy her. During this, Mamori notices some classmates like Yasu observing with anger but keeping their heads down, while the Takao sisters act calmly, just like the apathetic teacher in charge of the trip, Zakurogi Tomatsu. Suddenly, Mamori decides to stand up to the bully but freezes when the guy puffs out his chest. That's when Takudo steps in, and being a respected student makes Omiyata return the girl's book. Even so, Omiyata continues to bully the students, with Yasu being the next victim. The teacher then intervenes in a bizarre way, saying it would be a huge loss if Yasu took his own life, and even suggests the boy should do it when he's not the teacher if he chooses that path. Suddenly, without any noticeable reason, the students on the bus are transported to a world called Alien by the goddess Vicious. Without offering explanations, the entity reveals that the summoned humans are the hope to defeat the great demon empire. 200 years ago, the heroes of that time defeated this great evil, but the dark forces have returned once more. Because of this, Vicious needs the powers of the chosen ones again. The students around are confused, with some thinking it was a dream, others trying to process what the entity told them, and some believing they had died. Strangely, the teacher takes responsibility, confessing he doesn't know what's happening, but asks everyone to listen to what the goddess has to say. Apparently, he was eyeing the divine virtues of the mysterious woman's body. Meanwhile, Mamori analyzes the spacious stone-built room with fire baskets and soldiers wielding swords and spears. Lastly, a goddess with golden eyes. Thinking about this, he pinches his own cheek, doubting he was really taken to an alternate world. Among everyone, Takudo seems the most composed and coldly asks if they were summoned to fight this so-called demon empire. When the goddess confirms he wants to know what happens if they refuse, Vicious calmly responds that they will be prevented from returning to their world. Takudo questions how they could return, and she explains that the reverse summoning ritual requires a special element called the Demon King's essence, and there are two ways to obtain this essence. One is to obtain the heart of the Demon King, the very source of the Demon King's essence, and the other is to collect the essence that will come after defeating this great enemy and place it in the crystal necklace Vicious carries. In his usual manner, Omiyata confronts the goddess, saying they have nothing to do with this empire, so Vicious kneels before the summoned ones and begs for their help, calling the students the heroes of salvation. Sagu argues that they are just ordinary humans and perhaps not the help the goddess expects, but the entity reveals that all of them have powers they never imagined, causing a tremendous commotion among everyone. Out of nowhere, a giant wolf is brought in along with a human. The wolf is then released and devours the man, instantly spreading blood all over the hall. Using a fireball, Vicious exterminates the beast. Faced with the facts, Hijiri Takao realizes they have no choice but to accept what's on the table. Then the entity announces it's time to confront the hidden abilities within each of them, and each student steps up to a magic sphere that determines the summoned one's skill level. As everyone took their turns, the sphere showed average energy until it was Omiyata's turn, who displayed above normal strength. However, Takudo follows and breaks the evaluation crystal, making Vicious applaud and say he is part of the S class. Omiyata, envious, asks what class he belongs to, and the goddess informs him he is ranked A. As always, the boy realizes he will never be on Takudo's level. Next, Ayaka takes the test and also breaks another crystal. Besides her, Hijiri also joins the S class, something that had never happened before in this world, with so many summoned ones showing such high abilities. Finally, it's Mamori Tauka's turn, who expresses a purple light in the sphere, perhaps the weakest of all. Without giving any details, the goddess sends the next person for testing, leaving Mamori confused. He asks which class he belongs to, but is ignored, so he steps away, certain that he is just a background character in this whole process, just like in the world he came from. While these thoughts hammer in his mind, Memori hears from the goddess that one of the summoned has reached the strength of the dark hero, the most powerful of all. With his hand on the crystal, Yasu knew his time had come. Next, the summoned ones learn to see their statuses, and Memori is frustrated with the low numbers he displays, discovering he belongs to the E class. Each of the summoned possessed an exclusive ability, and he was capable of inflicting status conditions. Omiyata, fed up with all the talking, tells the goddess to take a break. The teacher asks the student to speak respectfully to the entity, so the boy starts to show off by throwing in everyone's face that he is a class, unlike the teacher who is only D class. Next, Vicious announces a ritual and calls Memori to participate, stating that he is the lowest ranked among all the summoned. She explains that in the past, the weakest always posed a hindrance to the higher class heroes, and thus it was decided that the best course of action would be to discard these individuals. However, since public disposal might cause an uprising among the others, she decides to give the lowest ranked hero a chance. Memori will be left in a ruin, and if he survives, he will no longer be discarded. In this ruin, highly dangerous criminals will be lurking along with other heroes who were also cast aside. This terrible place is known as the Ruin of Discard. Desperate, Memori argues that he possesses a unique ability and therefore shouldn't be considered so weak, but the goddess dismisses this completely. According to her, abilities that inflict conditions are worthless in this world because they generally only work against extremely weak enemies and last very briefly. In other words, Vicious disdainfully says that this is the ability of a loser. Outraged, Memori remembers that it was she who brought him there only to be discarded, but Takudo himself steps in to end the discussion. Tired of the weakling Memori has shown himself to be. Humiliated by everyone, the weakest of the group feels a hand on his shoulder and realizes it's Yasu, someone he had helped a lot when he was bullied. However, like the others, Yasu joins the chorus and belittles him, putting him down for being of inferior rank. Then the process of teleporting the discarded hero begins, and as is tradition in Alien, each summoned individual receives a unique item. In Memori's case, he is given a worn-out leather bag capable only of making a gem glow when mana is imbued into it. Ayaka tries to intervene and point out how wrong they are in treating the boy this way, but Vicious knocks her down with a punch to the stomach. On top of that, she orders everyone to look at the discarded hero and warns that this will be the fate of all who do not have the necessary capability to fulfill the objective, in other words, the losers. Fed up with the humiliation, Memori unleashes one of his powers, paralysis, but nothing happens to the goddess, who is immune to such weak abilities due to a dissipating bubble that constantly surrounds her body. This bubble provides absolute protection against status spells. Given this, the goddess takes the opportunity to further humiliate the boy, loudly declaring that Memori is a Class E loser. Just to test his above-average powers, Takudo casts a dragon explosion on the hall's wall, clearly showing the contrast between himself and the discarded hero, who bows his head in the face of everything he is experiencing. Along with Takudo, all the students despise their classmate, who was classified as the weakest, while Vicious asks for Memori's last words. Crying and speechless, the boy remembers when he was beaten by his father. On one of those days, his brother came to him and taught him that no matter how much we pretend to be harmless, that is never who we really are. In fact, this repressed way of being is the opposite of what we can express, and showing this personality trapped inside us is what will dictate our path. With this memory in mind, Memori tells the goddess to go to hell and warns her to prepare herself in case he returns alive. With that, he is teleported to the Ruin of Discard and tries to open his status, but it's not possible due to the obscured vision of the place. Remembering what Vicious said about his return, the boy imbues mana into the accessory to generate a glow that he uses like a flashlight. Looking around, Memori notices the dreadful cave he has been placed in, along with split skulls littering the ground. As if that wasn't enough, he is attacked by a huge monster lurking in the dark corners of that area, and his only option is to run for his life, aware that he could never face such a powerful being. While running, he feels the real fear of losing his life, so he dims the light from his bag and keeps fleeing as best he can while crying, neither happy nor sad, just scared. However, during During his escape, Memori realizes that this feeling isn't really fear. Tripping over a stone along the way, he falls, and then gets up, reflecting that the feeling bothering him is frustration, the same frustration he felt before being thrown into this filthy place. Be that as it may, he knows it is his end. Without weapons, without status, without strong abilities, he cannot confront a creature of this size. Suffering from all the humiliation he endured before arriving there, Memori uses paralysis on the monster. Seeing that it worked, he runs again while recalling what the goddess said about his status ability only working on low-level monsters, and a minotaur doesn't seem like a weak creature. After putting some distance between himself and the enemy, he encounters a bizarre bird exuding pure and genuine hostility. Crying once more, Memori expresses his burning desire to stay alive, so he repeats the strategy that worked last time. Casting paralysis, he immobilizes the monster in front of him. Still terrified, he checks his status and notices that his mana is running out, so he will only be able to cast one poison. Doing so, he observes the ghastly bird bleeding from its eyes and every possible orifice. The minotaur, having freed itself from the paralysis status, returns to attack the boy, who without mana wonders if the cliché won't be someone saving him at the last moment. However, as he saw just a short time ago, none of those people seemed willing to help Tauka Memori, the discarded hero. Alone in this world, Memori feels the same hatred he had for his father. When in the middle of a beating, he said he would kill that man. Back then, he realized he wasn't the protagonist of anything, and no one would help him when he needed it. So it was kill or be killed with no escape. All he could do was use his mana outside of his status adjustments if it ran out. In desperation, Memori tried to paralyze the minotaur, but according to the system, it wasn't possible to apply the same ability to a target repeatedly. So the boy decided to use a sleep spell, putting the monster to sleep. Then he poisoned the target, imagining there were other limitations besides not being able to repeat the skill, plus his mana was almost gone. As if that weren't enough, a legion of fierce birds approached the discarded hero. With no other choice, he used his mana outside of status to paralyze each of the enemies, causing numbness in his body as his entire power reserve drained away. Behind the birds, minotaurs made room to attack the human, who continued his strategy of paralyzing the targets despite everything. His body gradually reached its limit, with his leg trembling and making it difficult to stand. As a last gasp, Memori stood with difficulty until the system announced he had leveled up, which completely regenerated his mana and increased his status adjustment. With this, he assumed that killing that bird was enough for him to evolve, and now that he could fight again, it was his chance to continue the strategy as best as he could. As he kept using paralysis, he saw the level of this ability increase to the point where it could hit multiple targets at once. Feeling more confident, he paralyzed all the enemies and reflected that the goddess might be the only one unaffected by this power, because so far he had managed to hold his own. However, he noticed there was a distance limit to inflict status conditions, seeing that distant enemies couldn't be reached. So he walked among the paralyzed and poisoned creatures one by one. At this point, he saw his opponents only as walking experience points. His power had developed to the point where he acted comfortably in the face of danger. His stats were multiplied due to his level, and the massive amount of mana he achieved gave the impression that it was possible to get out alive. As the poisoned monsters died, Tauka Memori leveled up, constantly reaching near level 400. With the ocean of mana flowing in his veins as he leveled up, the boy put the opponents to sleep with his sleep ability, reaching level 500 over time. At that moment, the monsters that had been attacking turned and fled. After getting rid of the threat, he walked through the ruin of discard in search of equipment that could be used. Nothing very useful was found among that pile of dead, but there was no time to lament. He needed to find food and water to survive. Amid the endless columns of that dark abyss, Memori begged for food from whoever might be there, even though no one was there to help him. He was so hungry that he began to see the minotaurs as oxen ready to have their meat consumed. Once the poison was gone, Memori tried to cut the animal's skin, but its carcass was extremely tough. Faced with this, he tore out the creature's eye and bit into it, but the acid inside made him spit it out. out. Lying among the monster corpses, he reflected that this place was entirely designed not to leave any survivors. Suddenly, he saw the purple part of the crystal in his bag getting bigger and its weight increased drastically. Memori opened the bag and found packaged meat with soda, then drank the liquid without questioning where it came from. Definitely, this was the best food he had ever eaten in his life. Not for the taste itself, but for the necessity. Memori didn't know exactly what those colors were in his bag, or if it would produce food again, but either way that unique item wasn't to be abandoned. As the days passed, the young man got used to the ruin of discard, and the dozens of monsters lining the dungeon could be seen paralyzed and poisoned, falling one by one to the ground lifeless. Observing that domino-worthy scene, Memori lamented the terrifying acts he had been committing under those circumstances, as if his soul screamed for humanity amidst that hell. As his level increased, he cried and questioned why he was there. As a child, Memori asked similar questions. His father wasn't a minotaur, but was so grotesque in the eyes of the little boy that he seemed scarier than the fierce birds trying to kill him day after day in the ruin of discard. Speaking of which, since that time he knew he had to kill his father unless he wanted to be killed himself. Until one day his uncles extended their hands to the little boy, giving him the warmth of a family. They taught Memori to be kind, to have empathy for others' pain, and this upbringing made the boy think he had learned to be like them. However, looking at the devastation around him, he felt nothing, not even while taking the lives he had taken. The lack of fear in killing made him fear himself, that there was nothing that could be done, not in the ruin of discard. As his brother used to say, one must accept who they are. With this in mind, the exiled hero now walked as the new Toka Memori. As days passed, in the midst of his long journey, the young man found a cave environment with a unique atmosphere where a door had a talisman with a blue crystal. The color reminded him of mana, which made him imbue the stone with this type of energy and enter a room where a couple had died long ago, but with no signs of struggle, just accepting their death, holding hands. Memori paid his respects to the dead and opened a bag beside them, discovering a good amount of precious stones. Walking through that territory, Memori reached the 25th hall, which required an enormous amount of mana to open. Inside, another discarded hero had been reduced to bones by the time of decay, and a tear in the deceased's tunic made the boy imagine it was the fatal wound that led to his death. Among the deceased's belongings, a letter had the language of this world, but to Memori's surprise he could read it. According to the writings, this man was Anglin Bathard, known as the Great Sage. However, he was better known by his former nickname, the Dark Hero. At that moment, Memori remembered when the goddess said that Yasu Tomohiro had awakened a power equal to that of the Dark Hero, the most powerful of all. According to Anglin, he was forcibly sent to these ruins by the goddess Vicious because he was no longer needed. In this letter, Anglin asks the person who finds his body to take something he desperately brought there. In the sage's words, the demon army is wicked, but its wickedness is nothing compared to the goddess Vicious. Minoru doesn't know to what extent this is different from that entity, but the hatred he feels for her stirs a mixed feeling between the need for justice and revenge, like a clash of evil against evil. Among his belongings was the complete work of forbidden arts, where recipes for potions and magical tools illustrated the aged pages. Additionally, a scroll of forbidden magic was described with symbols that Memori could not decipher but might be useful at some point. Upon opening the book, Memori was met with the phrase, "Beware of the soul devourer, it was what killed everyone else." As he walked through those dark alleys, the young man honored the dead scattered on the ground, as if trying to stay sane, or perhaps even reclaim part of the humanity he thought he had destroyed. At the top of the staircase ahead, he found a door that required an object to open, and in the hope it would lead to the surface, the forgotten hero set out to find this item, whatever it might be. Thinking to himself, not even the Dark Hero, the most powerful being in this world, was able to face the soul devourer, but Memori believed he had evolved to the point of trying his luck. Speaking of which, the end of a corridor featured a macabre face carved into a wall, and on the forehead of this head, an object that might be what he needed. Imagining it might be the soul devourer, Memori exposed himself with the intent of quickly invoking some ability, but was surprised by an absurd reaction power that injured his hand with a beam of energy. Apparently, this beam is activated activated when the target shows intent to attack. Moreover, that face was out of reach of his magic, so perhaps it was better to evolve more before confronting this thing. However, the structure detached from the wall and revealed itself to be a creature with a life of its own, which could mean the classic kill or be killed scenario for the discarded hero. Outside, a woman reached the ruin of discard and approached the entrance. Memori did not doubt that a being of this level was unaware of his presence there, so he needed to stay as alert as possible. Soon the Soul Devourer expelled a viscous substance that gave life to hideous monsters formed from that disgusting puddle. One day these monsters were the discarded humans in this ruin, and their faces were the same as they were when killed by the macabre entity, their last expression before death. Curious about the boy's reaction to this bizarre spectacle, the Soul Devourer opened a smile that emitted an indescribable sound, almost driving the human insane. Memori paralyzed the monsters in front of him and tried to poison them, but something prevented him from doing so. It was the feeling of empathy that still existed within him, because even though they were dead, the human faces in agony caused a sense of terror and hesitation. Once again, the boy shed tears of despair, and the Soul Devourer savored the realization of his intent. More and more monsters were expelled from that malevolent entity, making Memori beg for his life, unable to harm what he saw as people. In the demon's eyes, the expression of ecstasy spread across his entire face, widening his pupil to the peak of emotion. In light of this, Memori felt that the enemy had let his guard down, so he decided to paralyze the devourer who had made a fatal mistake that only the most powerful beings known could make so confident in their immortality. According to Memori, the certainty of victory gives rise to his worst enemy, overconfidence. After convincing the demon with his desperate performance, the boy couldn't have expected a better act. After all, it had been years and years of trying to be normal, pretending to be someone he really wasn't. Memori might have deluded himself and thought at some point that he was like the others, but that didn't change the fact that from the beginning everything he was practicing was a distasteful performance but necessary to live in society. Over the years he had forgotten who he really was, but the ruin of discard brought back the true Tauka Memori. With that said, he poisoned the Soul Devourer, responding to blood with blood as it should be. After being thrown into this place for being weak, after being ridiculed, the boy found in hatred the strength necessary for his redemption. In the end, a boy discarded like trash was able to overthrow the lord of this hell. According to Memori, a pathetic end for the Soul Devourer. Meanwhile, the demon tried to struggle against the paralysis, but the resistance only caused additional damage, and the creature's bluish blood oozed from those twisted eyes. As the poison coursed through the demon's veins, the devourer was devoured until cracks could be seen in the heavy structure of his body. With that, the entity died, freeing the souls imprisoned in the abyss within. The spirits thanked the young man for what he had done, and among them was the couple Memori had found in one of the secret rooms. Lastly, Anglin Bathard, the great sage, personally asked Memori to destroy the goddess Vicious. After the brief encounter, Memori collected the devourer's eye and placed it in the door that led to the exterior of the ruin. Before leaving forever, he bid farewell to the place that had awakened his true self.